Have you ever noticed how some historical figures, uh, they almost seem to exist more in legend than in reality?
Mm.
You hear names like Jack the Ripper, Vlad the Impaler,
Right.
Elizabeth Bathory, and right away you think of these monstrous acts they're infamous for.
Yeah.
So today we are diving into one of those enigmas,
Yeah.
Elizabeth Bathory, the so-called Blood Countess.
And it's interesting you say that because her story isn't just about the alleged atrocities, but it's also about the world that she lived in.
Right.
16th century Hungary, a time of really intense political unrest, deeply entrenched social hierarchies,
Yeah.
and let's be honest, some pretty brutal customs.
Yeah, it's like Game of Thrones, but with less dragons and more, well, blood,
All right.
unfortunately. So to really get her, I guess we have to understand the world that made her. She was born into one of the most powerful, noble families in all of Hungary.
Mm-hmm.
Even had ties to, like familial ties to Hungarian royalty.
Oh, absolutely. And these powerful families, they guarded their bloodlines very closely. But it's interesting because that had some pretty bad consequences for Elizabeth.
Really?
Yeah, you see, because they were big fans of keeping it in the family.
Oh,
A
no.
lot of intermarriage going on. And so, while that's great for, consolidating power,
Right.
it might not have been so great for, well, other things.
Yeah, when you put genetics and power together, what could possibly go wrong?
Exactly.
So, I mean, what happened?
Well, some historians believe that Elizabeth suffered from seizures, maybe even epilepsy, and it was very likely linked to, you guessed it, all that intermarriage.
Wow. And we have to remember, this is a time when illness wasn't as simple as, just taking a pill.
Oh, absolutely not.
And epilepsy, that was terrifying.
Oh, yeah.
Really poorly
Well,
understood.
people thought it was the work of the devil.
So imagine being Elizabeth, this young woman surrounded by all this wealth and privilege, but then you're burdened by this frightening condition that no one really has any answers to.
Right. And the cures that were being whispered about, let's just say modern medicine, it's come a long way.
Yeah.
It's come a long way.
I'm intrigued, though. What kind of cures are we talking about here?
So one of the more common cures involved using the blood of someone without epilepsy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I know. It's a chilling thought,
Yeah.
but it wasn't totally unheard of at the time.
Wow. That's wild. It really makes you think about the impact that those early experiences must have had on her. This mix of a mysterious illness, these barbaric cures,
Yeah.
and then this unbelievable pressure to appear healthy, to appear in control. But, before we get into these horrific accusations against her,
Right.
we need to understand that for a time, she lived a seemingly normal life, at least for a noblewoman of the time anyway.
Yeah. At the age of 15, she was married to Ferenc Nadezhdy, another wealthy noble. He was a military leader.
Right.
They lived a very lavish lifestyle, and Elizabeth was even trusted to manage their estates while Nadezhdy was away on military campaigns.
Which was often, right, because wasn't he like a war hero?
He was. Nadezhdy was a very, very feared soldier.
Wow.
He was known for using brutal tactics against the Ottomans. He even got the nickname Black Knight of Hungary.
So maybe normal is a relative term here.
Right.
Because we're talking about a world where violence was just, it was everywhere.
Commonplace.
Yeah, commonplace.
Yeah.
And power, both political and personal, that was often achieved through some pretty ruthless means.
Absolutely.
And it's in this context that the whispers about Elizabeth's cruelty start popping up.
Yes.
It's like something out of a Gothic novel.
It really is.
This juxtaposition of opulence and luxury, but then this creeping sense of dread.
And this is where the source introduces us to this figure named Dorca.
Dorca, yes, she's like this character straight out of folklore, isn't she?
Yeah.
This mysterious servant who leads our noblewoman down this dark and twisted path.
Yeah. And according to the source, Dorca was more than just a servant, She was like a confidant to Elizabeth. She supposedly encouraged her more cruel impulses, and she even supposedly introduced her to darker occult practices.
Hold on, are we talking like blood rituals and dark magic now?
Yeah. So
How much of this is real and how much is made up?
that's what historians are trying to figure out even today, because, witchcraft and the occult were a big deal back then.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
In Europe during this time. Accusations of witchcraft were, they were a tool to discredit people, especially women, and to take their power.
So basically, in a world where a woman's power was seen as dangerous, maybe even evil,
Exactly.
accusing her of being chummy with dark forces, that would be a pretty quick way to, take her down.
Exactly. But with Elizabeth, it goes beyond just witchcraft.
Okay.
It gets really, really horrific. The source says Elizabeth's cruelty went from, harsh punishments to torture and even murder.
Oh, my God.
And young servant girls, they were her main victims.
And that's where this whole blood countess thing comes from, right?
Yeah.
This image of this noble woman who's like obsessed with being young and beautiful.
Yes.
And she'll do anything to stay that way.
Exactly. And the source does not hold back on the details.
What do you mean?
They say that Elizabeth would bite her victims, she would burn them, cut them.
Oh, my God.
And then there's that infamous accusation that she would bathe in their blood because she thought it would keep her young forever.
I mean, I know that history can be exaggerated and blown out of proportion, but that is a tough image to shake.
Right.
Is there anything that backs up these claims? Or is it all just rumors and stories?
That's the big question about Elizabeth Bathory.
Right.
The source talks about torture devices found at her castle, but historians, they disagree on whether those were actually used the way they say she used them.
Right.
Some think the evidence was planted or misinterpreted, to take down a woman who had become too powerful.
So she was a pawn in their game,
It's
a
possible.
woman with money and freedom, so she becomes a target for people who want what she has.
Exactly. And don't forget, her husband, Frank Nodesty, he died a few years before these accusations against Elizabeth really blew up.
Right.
So when he died, that created this, power vacuum.
Of course.
And, her enemies would have been all too happy to,
Could jump on that.
to jump on that. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got political intrigue. We've got fear of powerful women. We've got everyone believing in the occult.
It's a lot.
Can we even tell what's true about Elizabeth Bathory?
It's hard, for sure.
Yeah.
But even if we accept that some of it might be exaggerated or just made up, the source still shows us a woman who knew how to make people afraid of her, how to make them obey her.
Right.
It says she had a whole network of people helping her.
Like who?
Servants, even other nobles.
Wow. Okay, but if it was all made up, wouldn't someone have said something?
Well, according to the source, some people did.
Really?
Yeah, they say that the people in the nearby villages, they had their suspicions about the castle.
Okay.
Like stories about missing girls, weird things happening, screams at night.
Oh, gosh, that's creepy.
But they were too scared to say anything.
Right. It's like that saying, the only way evil can win is if good people don't do anything. It's just like that saying, right? The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing.
Right.
But, was her reign of terror ever going to end? Could she really keep up this act,
Right.
If these horrific things were happening, could she really pretend everything was normal?
Well, it seems like all those secrets, maybe even the fact that the crimes were getting worse, that's kind of what led to her downfall.
Yeah.
Remember those whispers we talked about?
Oh.
Eventually, they turned into screams. More people started talking, sharing their suspicions.
And the source mentions that a servant actually escaped.
Right.
That must have been a huge turning point.
It was. This escape, along with all the people who had disappeared, it finally, reached the ears of someone who could actually do something.
Okay, cool.
György Thurzo. He was Elizabeth's own cousin and the Palatine of Hungary.
Wow, imagine having to investigate your own family
Right.
for these horrific crimes. Talk about a family reunion you don't want to go to. So what happened? What did he do?
Well, Thurzo knew that this could be a huge scandal. Think about it. Accusing someone as high up as Elizabeth, especially without super strong proof,
Yeah.
that could backfire big time.
Yeah.
So he had to be careful. He gathered evidence, talked to witnesses, all while, trying not to step on anyone's toes in the court.
He was risking a lot, his reputation, everything to expose her.
Absolutely. But at a certain point, there was just too much evidence to ignore.
Right.
So in December 1610, Thurzo, he shows up at Elizabeth's castle with a bunch of armed men and...
Okay, I have to say, this is straight out of a horror movie.
I know, right?
The creepy castle, dark secrets. This powerful woman with a mysterious past.
Right.
Like Edgar Allan Poe or something.
It's no wonder Elizabeth Bathory's story is still so popular.
I know, right? But, so they get to the castle.
They get to the castle, and, what they find is something out of a nightmare. The source says there were dungeons, and they were full of these young girls. Some were barely alive.
Oh, my God.
Some were, they didn't make it. People talked about torture chambers, blood everywhere. They even found a diary, supposedly Elizabeth's diary, where she wrote about everything she did.
She kept a diary. Talk about evidence.
It would be, except, not everyone agrees that it was real.
Oh, really?
Yeah, some historians think the diary was fake, something made up to make her look even worse and convince everyone she was guilty. Others think that while some of it might be exaggerated, There's probably some truth in there somewhere.
So much mystery. So what about Elizabeth? What happened to her?
Well, you could say it was a weird mix of justice and mercy.
What do you mean?
Well, because she was so high up socially, because her family was so powerful they couldn't really put her on trial, it would have been a huge scandal.
Right.
So instead, she was put on house arrest
In her own
in
cast.
her own castle, but not like, a normal house arrest. They walled her up in a room.
Oh my God.
There was a small hole for food, and that was it.
Wow, that's harsh.
That's where Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess, died 4 years later.
What a strange, sad ending. But after all this time, after centuries of stories and legends, can we even know who she really was?
That's the question that keeps historians up at night. Yeah. Was she a victim of her time, a woman who was used and demonized by her enemies? Or was she a true monster, obsessed with blood and staying young?
It's probably somewhere in between. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe her childhood, all that violence and cruelty, maybe that messed her up. Maybe it was mental illness, the pressure of society, the desire for power, all of it combined. Maybe that's what drove her to do these things, if she even did them.
Right.
Or maybe, just maybe, the stories are true. Maybe the Blood Countess is a reminder that even in the most civilized places, there's still darkness.
And that's the thing about history, isn't it? It's not always about finding the right answers. Sometimes it's about sitting with the unknown, the what-ifs.
So the next time you hear the name Elizabeth Bathory, don't just think about the blood and the scary stories. Think about her world, what she believed in, even the things she wanted: power, acceptance, control. Maybe those are the things that could make anyone a monster.
Because sometimes the scariest monsters aren't the ones in our nightmares. They're the ones living inside us.
And on that terrifying note, we'll let you go.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.